Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMann and Anthony, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultants Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMann and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome back to the Consultants Way podcast. Anthony Paluska joined by Dean McMann. And today we're lucky enough to have Eric Sanchez with us. Eric has an extensive background and history in professional services and has played that role at many different organizations across the software industry. And so, Eric, we're excited to have you on here. Welcome to the show. Please provide a bit deeper introduction of yourself to the audience.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here and share some of my experiences. So over 25 years of experience in the industry, working for software companies. I started the old-fashioned way, working on the end user side, being a code jockey, developing and delivering, and eventually worked my way up into the ranks. Kind of transcended the end user community, being the recipient or the purchaser of software, went into being an industry analyst where I specialize in infrastructure, integration, process management, and a number of others back then, including master data management, until I was recruited into the software industry itself. So that's where I started making my bones, played in various teams from product management, product strategy to OEM negotiator responsible for all inbound and outbound OEM contracts, and eventually into the professional services realm as well.
Wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you here, and I know the topic we're going to get into is going to feel like everyone's talked about it before, and there's a reason. There's a reason for that, and this broader topic, and we see it all the time. I know you've seen it, which is over all of this time, as much as software companies have evolved, and as much as professional services have evolved, and as much as the sales and PS integration has been focused on and worked on, and we feel like we're making a breakthrough all the time, and there's little wins. We keep coming back, and we keep seeing the same patterns present themselves. And so, Eric, why does it feel like Groundhog Day in so many software companies when it comes to selling services?
I wish I had the answer to that question, but it is so true. It's no matter how many times you do this, no matter how many organizations you go to, no matter how many you try to help, it's the same themes over and over again. And it baffles me. It's baffled me for over 2 decades now, and I'm still struggling to find the answer why, despite having the data available to you for you to be able to make the decisions that truly drive impact, not only for customers, but also the organization itself. And it's all about data, especially in this day and age. We're about data-driven decisioning. However, that data is often overlooked, or it's kind of wiped under the proverbial rug, or just plainly ignored.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that data. What kind of data are you talking about here? What are we ignoring that we should be paying attention to, or what are we maybe looking at but discounting? What when you say data, dive a little bit deeper into that for us.
Sure, it's the impact that professional services actually has on software companies' ability to drive adoption, drive revenue, not only in terms of ARR or ACV, which is the typical metrics that they're going to focus on, but what about looking on the back end? How does it impact expansions? How does it actually impact the support organization, which has a direct correlation to net retention revenue, right? Or net revenue retention. Those types of things are often lost. So if you look at the initial sale of software, the initial deal with a new logo, what is the rate of expansion? How long does it take? And what is the size compared to the original buy? That's often overlooked. And it boggles my mind. It drives me kind of crazy sometimes being in those situations whereby let's give away services for free. and we're just going to do this little thing here, and all of a sudden the magic is going to happen, and it's a bit more involved than that.
Eric, do you think this happens because of two phenomena that are going parallel? One is that a lot of executives in SaaS companies are there for a short period of time in a transaction. It's a financial vehicle for them to build wealth as opposed to build a company. And two, we're just coming off of the generation of SaaS as its first generation, where it's get plugs, get plugs, get more accounts, get more accounts, get more accounts, because that's what the market would pay you for, right? Pays you for the SaaS model. And those two things together, I'd love your opinion on, because you've seen an awful lot of leadership teams, but I'm beginning to feel like those two things are encouraging short-term and two-dimensional decisions.
I can definitely say and support those two statements to be true, right? So if you look at the first one, it's the transactional aspects of deal making. Yes, and I'm going to say, let me preface it by the way with saying it doesn't apply to everyone. The sharper AEs, the sharper sales folks actually get it, and they're going to work with professional services because they understand the long-term impact is going to have on the overall relationship. And we'll cover some metrics about that shortly. What I do see, especially the new sales folks coming in, they just started, they have less than 6 months with the organization. They're fighting tooth and nail to make a name for themselves, get on the proverbial board and make themselves known. They tend to be very short-sighted. That's where it becomes transactional. But to your point, though, is that transactional nature and building wealth, they're interrelated in my opinion, that they get enamored with that and they're willing to sacrifice what the long-term impact of that relationship is going to be by taking the cheaper route. And we'll get into the trifecta a little later. I'll just mention it now for giggles. It's the faster, better, cheaper syndrome. Like, we're going to do it faster and cheaper and forget about quality. And what you end up seeing is a material impact on the growth of the customer, number one. That's usually on the back end. So how quickly are they adopting? How quickly are they expanding? How much are they enriching the relationship between themselves and the software provider? But it also impacts the customer acquisition cost, which is often lost as well. So how long does it take you to get to a yes, relying solely on the pre-sales organization? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Also, I think the executive group themselves look at, I'm not building IBM. I'm just going to be here at Jimbo SaaS company for 3 years, and I need to move my valuation needle. And the valuation's about new accounts, right? And as opposed to value in an account, long-term, viability, the metrics that you might stress more if you thought you were going to be there 20 years.
No, absolutely. That short-term mindset has a huge impact on even moving that needle, right? If you're focusing in on growing new logos, it's great, you can do that, but you don't have to abandon the principles of the long-term relationship gains. Because ultimately, that's going to have a much larger impact on the valuation of the organization, right? So if I'm working, which is it happened to me often. If I'm working on a net new logo, the first thing I want to do is impress them. I want to impress them with the software. I want to make sure that they understand what they're buying, but more importantly, what instills that confidence and helps you get to that yes, to shorten that deal cycle, is instilling confidence on how to actually execute. So it's going from vision to execution and having a substantial, well-defined, highly methodical, pragmatic plan that allows them to measure progress as they engage. But you can't do that unless you have the right quality resources, the right competency levels, and more importantly, those that are able to translate complex topics into simple things they can apply to their business as a whole, right? So it's that that short-term mindset, I definitely believe it's a hindrance more than it helps. It has short-term gains, long-term losses, or failure to realize potential value. That, by the way, it applies to both customers and the vendor themselves. I firmly believe that.
Yes, I would agree with that as well. And so and we see that, right? We all see that the same way and see that clearly. I think a lot of the PS community that's out there listening to this sees and understands the value and the impact services and instilling that confidence in the sales process and bringing those capabilities that help de-risk it from a customer's perspective, that they know that there's this methodical process that we can go through to help them realize the value and the outcomes of the product. We all know that, or at least we feel like that's all true. How do we get the rest of the organization to understand and buy into that? How would you suggest somebody go through that journey if they're, let's say, they're running a PS organization?
Would you use a gun?
Yeah, that's crossed my mind. I'm not gonna lie. A gun, a stick. I'm a kid from Brooklyn, New York, right? We
Yeah,
always
yeah,
know how
yeah.
to solve things very
Yeah,
easily.
yeah.
No, but what I've always tried to do is highlight points using data, right? So I've often referred back to here's this cohort of customers where PS was actually engaged. And in some situations, I deliberately got us involved in order to kind of accentuate that point and prove value. And to me, once is an anomaly, twice is a coincidence, three times is a pattern. So when you have a cohort of greater than three, it starts to click. It doesn't always set off the light bulb, but it certainly helps. So what I've always pointed back to is here are X, Y, and Z opportunities that we engage with the customer. From the time that we actually sold to the time that they actually expanded was on average, I would say 5 to 7 months. That's While that's great, it is the size of that expansion due to the rate of adoption that kind of drove home the point, which was the expansions are usually 2x the size of the land. And why is that? Because we were able to tangibly prove the value being driven to customers, which effectively increased their confidence that we were the right vendor of choice. We are the right partner. In fact, they're starting to realize greater gains than they originally anticipated. Because again, we think with the end in mind, going back to the 7 habits, work our way back and then chunk it up into components or modules that they can experience a higher rate of return much quicker. And that usually means delivering ahead of schedule where they can actually see it. Right? So I always focused on that. I take it a step further and then highlight if you look at the customers that we participated in, just look at the support requests, the number of incidents that have actually emerged from those customers. The number's generally lower. The requests are more, oh, we look to expand it or do something more because we saw opportunity that we wanted to jump in on right away. So those requests are far less. They engage us for more, I don't want to say innovation, but kind of testing the theory and looking at the market as a whole to see how this would resonate and how they would actually be able to execute on that. The other thing we've also laid on there is net dollar retention. So, what is the propensity to keep those customers at a lower cost from a support perspective, which ultimately drives bottom line, right? When you start seeing those and they start seeing the correlation from the beginning all the way to the end, and then comparing it against a cohort where they did not include services or services was not part of it, where that's where we become the the military unit that's parachuting in to save the day or salvage the relationship, it starts to hit home. And now that's when the light bulb stops flickering and starts becoming much more stabilized. Like, oh, I get it now. It takes them a year or two. By that time, going back to Dean's comments earlier, they only have about 12 months left in their tenure and they're about to leave. And that's a big challenge.
I love the way you communicate about it. You know, we really, as a community, ought to start and maybe we'll take the lead on this, but start publishing consistently those stories and that information across the industry so that they're inundated with, to shorten the 2 years of learning right before they leave. Eric, and I can imagine how many leadership groups you've worked with. You go, oh, we're back to that. Oh, we're back to that. I get it. Yeah. But we often talk about it. It is literally paid for stickiness. They will pay us to make them a better customer. There's nothing better, right? It's like, can you imagine anything better than getting paid to make me want to stay with you?
Oh my gosh, if you were only able to see some of the analysis that we've actually run. So it's one thing for me to talk about these things and highlight them, maybe even graph it out, chart it out for folks during a meeting. But it's another thing when you get a cohorts of folks saying, you know what, we're going to do an in-depth analysis on that. We're going to run a report and see if that actually holds true. And the results of this quantification process was amazing. I started laughing in the meeting where it was presented on, and looking at my direct, my peers, right? So at the same leadership level, where they presented, they looked at several, I think it was several hundred customers over a 2 year span. And we measured it based on 4 different points. The customer buys, they're confident they're going to do it themselves. The customer decides they want to do it cheaper, so they hire a third-party consultancy, a contractor. They used our services, and then the fourth one was what happens when you combine the consultants, the third-party consultants, with our services, and that's more from an economics perspective. And the findings were interesting, right? So if you look at the first cohort, customers that did it themselves, you look at their growth rate over 2 years, it was a standard 5 to 8%, meaning that that was a standard built-in uplift year over year within their contracts. When they hired consultancies, it jumped up maybe a few percentage points, let's call it 10 to 20%. When they used services, it was a hockey stick increase going from 10, 20% to 167% growth in 2 years. So that signifies stickiness, adoption, expansion. They're starting to think more creatively, think more broadly, think outside of the box on how to apply the platform. The fourth one was even more interesting, which was professional services and the third party. And that was the biggest jump. So you go from 160 some odd point or increase to 230 plus point increase over that same period of time. There was silence in the room for about 10 seconds. And the first question was, is that real? Like, no, these are customers. Then they started layering on top of that all the other metrics that we talked about. The customer incidents were lower. They were happier. They felt confident in their ability to adopt. They're doing more. So naturally, it says, well, how do we do that? It's the same thing we've been talking about for the past couple of years, right? This is just something.
It's not magic.
Yeah.
We don't have to do something tragically different, right?
Yeah, it's incredible when you just kind of take a step back and actually listen to your peers. And I think part of it, I want to go back to some of the 2 points you raised earlier, longevity and role, and then the transactional aspects of it. It's not rocket science, right? It's about doing it right the first time. It's not about me trying to sell professional services. That's just a way for me to be able to cover costs. I can expand the team better support customers. Is it profitable, not profitable? That's a business decision, and I'm okay with that. But it is about driving long-term customer value so that you can get them engendered to you and become stickiness. I want them to focus on being a number one partner with us or seeing us as the go-to platform. So in reality, when you look at my underlying motives, they have always been, how do you grow ACV? How do you grow ARR? How do you increase your net dollar retention and reduce your costs in the back end, all in one fell swoop, by leveraging professional services to be a strategic contributor, a strategic advisor. There are several other things you can put in that category, and how to bolster that customer relationship. If for nothing else, I've always told customers, if I've done my job right, meaning if I've run this team correctly, I work myself out of a job with you because I'm going to enable you. I'm going to teach you how to think like we do, deploy it as we do, and you're not going to really need me unless it's going to be a complex situation that goes beyond your realm of thinking. And that's great. That's where I want to be.
I think those are great points. I mean, the data is so compelling. It's unbelievable. And the point there, and I like your concept when you dove into this, right? Profitable, unprofitable. That's the business decision here. But the two things that are very clear is independent of that aspect of it, professional services adds a tremendous amount of value to our customers and to our organization. And we need to make sure that everybody understands that in our organization so that we're brought in early enough in the process so that we are sold into the account as a value add, whether that's sold for $1 or sold for $1 million, right? We are a value add to help you realize this outcome. And if the organization can adopt that mindset, we're going to get all the upside benefits of increased account growth and ARR and all of those different things. And so we've been saying it for years, but the data really jumps out at you when you look at it that way, which is professional services is a tremendous value add to all parties. And the key requirement for getting professional services to actually realize the value is actually making sure professional services is included. And that's such a simple message there, but we've seen it too many times, as you have, where it professional services is the afterthought, or they're brought in too late, or they're viewed as a necessary evil to I have to include this in my deal, rather than seeing all the benefits that you're talking about here.
I could not have stated that any better. And I think it's something that is highlighted often with the advent of customer success emerging as a prominent role within SaaS organizations. It never seems to amaze me that as part of their conversations with customers, how they start to highlight and point to things directly correlating to the inclusion of professional services, right? Where there's forward-looking business objectives that the customer wants to achieve and their ability to be able to competently staff them, excuse me, and deliver on them within their defined periods of time, right? So one of the things I highlight this often resonates with CFOs is cost, which is, by the way, in my opinion, also impacts why why the sales organization does not like to include professional services. You're too expensive. There are cheaper options in the market. Like, okay, great. Let's talk about that for a minute. And CFOs generally bring that up as well. I'm like, okay, great. Let me ask you a question. Is it the rate or is it the cost of the project that concerns you? Well, it's both. Like, no, no, no. One is a byproduct of the other. It has nothing, it's either the rate or is it the cost? Because if you're telling me that you can get 5 or 8 people at the cost of my one, I'm exaggerating a bit in some situations, then let's talk about their level of productivity and how quickly can they actually deliver. Because I scoped out this project that you have that's supposed to be a key initiative that using my resources, much less than the number that you plan to staff, simply because you can get a better rate, which actually comes down to a much lesser overall cost. So think of your TCO. It's going to be lower and it's going to be in less time. So let me ask you another question as you ponder that one is what kind of competitive advantage does that additional time, say me being able to deliver it in 8 months as opposed to 12 months, what does that do for you? So there's that lost opportunity, at which point I love to quote Warren Buffett, there's value in what we do. There's intrinsic value, and it all depends on the lens through which you look at it through. Either way, Mr. CFO, if you contract me, if you work with me, and we can bring in that other service provider at a later point, let's get the foundation in place first, at the very least. You're gonna look better on the books because your overall cost within that same period of time is going to be less, and you're going to deliver more. So, from a rate of return, how does that look for you?
And I think selling that value is a challenge for so many people that are product sales organizations out there. And it's not because they don't know how to sell value, right? I mean, we can understand all of that, but the customer gets anchored to a price for the technology that they think they're going to buy, and then all of these other things feel like add-ons in that. And we have to be able and be prepared to overcome those objections throughout that entire process. And the standalone partners or consultancies that support the implementation of these things, their whole business is focused around selling the services, and so they're very well prepared to have those conversations. And so when we compare those two sales discussions, we start off on our back foot because we have people that are trying to defend an anchored price point position that haven't been armed with all of the tactics and the examples that you just gave, and the I've been there, done that, and delivered this, that services organizations would have, whether that's internal or external. And so team selling becomes so important, and just making sure that we're there, not just selling the value internally of why professional services matters to make sure we're involved in those conversations, but being very easy to work with internally so that the sales team wants to bring us in, and we add value to those sales conversations, and we help accelerate their deals rather than hinder them, which is sometimes the fear. So yeah.
No, I totally agree with that, and it's funny, right? Because as you were talking, and everything you were saying was jiving with me, right? So I was looking back at a large customer, it was Fortune 100 customer, that had a critical initiative at the time. I mean, it had really major impacts if they didn't succeed, and they decided to go with a large consultancy, let's just call them that, very large consultancy, because it was cheaper price, it was fixed price, and they have predictability. And as I'm reviewing their plans, by the way, I should preface it with, at this time I still had my technical whereabouts, meaning I was still fluent enough in writing software or writing, programming, whatnot, that I could actually see and sit back and tell them, the math doesn't actually make sense because the way they're calculating is based on a 27-hour day, and unless they have a flux capacitor, I haven't been able to break that because I can't go back in time. I can elongate the day as much as I try. But anyway, so I started to highlight these things just from a practical perspective, as well as saying, looking at the actual delivery of the assets, it says you're heading for a really rough patch. The degree to which it's going to impact you monetarily is going to be high. I can't put a finger on how much, but you're going to hurt later. Well, you fast forward to it, and I'm having these discussions. You go 14 months into the engagement. It was a long-term engagement, like a 3-4 year transformation initiative, and they exhausted their reserve fund on top of the fees that they were paying. The reserve fund, just so you know, was 8 figures. They exhausted it. Like we got a problem here. Not only are we behind schedule, we've exhausted all our funds, so now we need for you to come in. I'm like, great. Okay, so here's now what it's going to cost you because I have to undo what they've done, redo it the right way, and now we can get you back on track. It's going to be tight, but I believe we can do it. So when the economics just went right out the door at that point, like, well, we can't agree to that. We went back and forth. Like, there's no negotiation. I try to avoid this for you 18 months ago, 14 months ago, whatever that timeline was, and you failed to heed my advice. This was to the executive sponsor. Like, I can't do anything for you. This is going to require an enormous amount of investment in me, and I'm trying to ensure that you meet your objectives. And by the way, you're going to get hammered by the market if you don't.
Well, you said as part of your sales conversations with the CFO, right? Are you concerned about my rate or about my cost? You just introduced the third dynamic in this, which is what is the risk that the cost that you actually pay is going to get you the outcome that's been promised to you? And and that's, I mean, it's unquantifiable, the challenge that they've run into, because not only does it cost them everything that you just said, but they're also 18 to 24 months behind where they should have been had they approached this whole process differently.
Absolutely. To your point on quantifying, I actually mapped this out for them mathematically. Meaning, if you take your cost, and there's a simple equation, take your cost divided by the level of experience, and you can be able to assess your risk. And that's going to get the quotient of that is going to tell you where you are on that risk spectrum and whether or not you can tolerate it. Usually with lower cost resources, inexperienced, you're going to get a higher risk because there's a lot that goes into it, especially when they do it wrong. Everything that they do has a ripple effect downstream. So when I quantified it for them and actually mapped that to an implementation strategy, it left them pondering like, how true is this? I'm like, math doesn't lie, number one. Math trumps all. Number two, time will tell, and you will be able to tell very quickly when you start paying attention to the details that it requires, right?
Now, let me make sure I caught that one. So, cost of a project, $1 million project divided by years of experience,
Yeah, level of experience, years of experience of the team that you're going to that you are.
and you quantify level of experience based on years of experience of your entire team. Is
Hmm.
that how you're doing it? And that gives you some dollar amount, and the higher the end product of that means you've got a higher risk. So your score higher is worse in this case because if you have 1 year of experience across $1 million project, then you have a risk score of 1 million. And if you had, you know, 1,000 years of experience, then your risk score is substantially less. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you have to take the balance of your team. If you have a four-person team, it's like a pyramid, right? The tip of the spear becomes your lead implementer, and they have the wherewithal, the level of experience to understand what decisions are made now and what the impact is going to be long term. Then you have that individual's right hand person to help take on some of the work while also delegating and supervising the ones below that, right? But even the lead individual is a hands-on individual. It can't be ivory tower type. That drives me nuts. I don't have ivory. I've never had ivory tower individuals on my teams because a lot of pontification and not enough substance for me. So these are tried and true individuals that deliver on a daily basis. So when you look at the overall level of experience and you map it to the delivery, that'll give you your risk score. And obviously, as you mentioned before, as the higher the risk score, the more danger you're going to be. But it's not a straight line graph because every little thing could have an exponential effect. So your actual monetary impact could be far greater than that $1 million, as the example I pointed out earlier.
Yeah. No, it doesn't quantify the economic risk. It gives you a relative risk score against other proposals, essentially, or other team structures, and cost models. So, well, Eric, we've touched a bunch of different things, and I know we're running out of time here. Two questions for you as we wrap up. One is, what's one thing you wish every software executive understood about the value of professional services? And we may have already talked about it, but so for one point, speak to that, right? That audience of the software exec, and what's the one message we want to leave them with? And then what's one or two messages we want to leave with our PS leaders out there, and a couple of key takeaways on how they can start to take advantage of some of the things that you've learned and experienced throughout your career.
Absolutely. So, in speaking with the sales execs, data doesn't lie, number one. Professional services should be always leveraged, and I tell this to everyone I work with, should be leveraged as a strategic lever to serve as a force multiplier for your license sales. If you are driven by economics on how much you're going to make, what is that commission going to be like, then you should partner with professional services on the front end to ensure that you can capitalize on that. So you can realize that potential return that you have. That's number one. Number two, we're not focused on selling services. Yes, it is a business. You have a defined cost structure embedded within it, and it has to be profitable, especially the larger the organization. Don't be afraid to position it because again it's meant to drive value, instill confidence in customers to be able to achieve their desired outcomes within less time. And there is room for professional services, there's room for third-party consultancies, that it doesn't have to be one or the other, which is a mindset that again, like many other things we talked about, it boggles my mind. I don't understand it. There is enough to feed all families. And it doesn't have to come at an egregious expense to the customer. The customer in return is receiving an exchange of value. And that value can translate into increasing their top line or increasing their bottom line, either making money or saving money. In rare cases, you're going to get both if you do it right. To the professional services leaders, what I implore them to do is one, leverage the data, same as the sales team. Two, speak with confidence. Don't be afraid to be a bit provocative and push back on this notion. If you're focusing on economics and you're having a rate discussion, somebody's in the wrong room, which is, by the way, something I tell my customers as well. I don't negotiate on rates. If you wanted to negotiate on value, let's talk about that. And the value is going to be in the delivery of this project. So pick one. It's either going to be rate or it's going to be cost. If you want a lower rate, I'm not the right individual for you. Go to third-party consultancies. You're going to get on average 20 to 30%, which seems to be the delta of a discount, and that's great. I'm going to be here when you struggle and when you fail, and there's going to be less room to negotiate. I am not afraid to paint that picture for customers either. So they shouldn't either. I've gone on many calls with customers where we're arguing about a rate. Like, you know what? You're absolutely right. If this is that important to you, willing to put your job on the line and sustain the financial risk or the negative financial impact it's going to have on you for short-term gain, I think you should. But I'm more long-term thinking, right? So use that to your advantage. Don't be afraid to get involved early on in the process. Support the pre-sales, shorten the deal cycle, drive value. Just make sure you're prepared to do it right. Put your money where your mouth is. When you speak from the heart and you speak, I'm very passionate about professional services and the value that we bring, right? So that's what comes out with customers. And it's that level of confidence of me being able to tell them, this is what you bought, but this is how you're going to implement it in order to achieve your business objectives and achieve those outcomes. That's what they want to hear. They want confidence. They want to know that you know what you're doing. You're the best person or persons for the job.
Well, that was great. Great summary, great takeaways for both our sales execs out there and our PS leadership out there. And I really appreciate you spending the time with us, walking us through all of this and sharing your experience and your data about how we as a professional services organization can get out of the trap of Groundhog Day and actually start to do things differently and could start to interact with our customers differently and could start to make an even greater impact in the market. So.
Eric, thank you so much. You're probably one of the spokesmen of the passion we should have for PS. We really appreciate it, and it never hurts that you have a great haircut.
Years of being in professional services.
Yeah, that's what. Hey, listen, we're gonna have you back. We love you, man.
Appreciate
Take
it.
care. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. All
Likewise.
right.
Take care.
What a passionate, articulate guy. And as we said when we were getting a chance to visit with Eric, that I think he's probably at least in the top echelon of people able to communicate the data-centric point of view of why this is so important, both from the analytics, but also from the passion and the storytelling and the just a real bane, a positive bane for the journey everybody's on. And I want him back because we didn't get to go into things like how, if you're going to play that role, how important it is that the people are developed to play that role. We didn't get to go into the firms that are changing from implementation only to adding real value in the customer and offering broader solutions. So I'd love to talk to him about that.
Yeah, it'd be great. We spent a bunch of time on the data and the power of why professional services is so important to the enterprise and why the sales team should care and why the business should care and the value that it has across the board. But a couple of his examples would be, I think, very useful for us to dive into as well, which are you're sitting in these different sales conversations and you're negotiating, you're getting pushback and price pressure. He seemed to be very centered on, hey, this is how I handle situations like this. This is how I negotiate with the CFO because I know what their pain points are, I know what their passion points are, and I know where I'm going to be able to push back on value versus price. And I'm sure there's just through his years of experience, probably lots of tactics we can dive into there. But I mean, clearly the data that data that he just provided could be lifted by any PS executive right now to make the case internally why PS needs to get involved more often in sales, which too often they're not, and they need to be viewed as a value add to the overall sales process versus an additional cost that becomes the first thing that's negotiated out of a contract when the client pushes back. And I think if a PS leader takes any of those data points, starts to gather some of their own data and their own enterprises and organizations experience there, and puts those two things together, we'll start to see professional services playing the role that it should be playing in the pre-sales process.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I do feel a burden as to help get those messages out in a more systematic way for the PS executive to take, but also just for the executives to see. Just almost like so many messages to our community to market. I feel a burden that we need to better articulate that for everybody.
Yes, we share the belief that PS needs to and ought to play a much more strategic and meaningful role in an organization. And any data that people like Eric or that we can gather and share with the community, we will certainly start to do that so that everybody can make their own internal case for why we need to be more involved. And then once PS is involved, the value becomes self-evident to the organization.
Yeah, yeah. Right now, we have to win them over kind of one at a time. Got to win this sales rep over, this account person over, this executive. Yeah, I am looking forward to the day when this obvious truth is an obvious truth.
Yeah, yeah. It's we were working with a client recently and she shared with me that they looked at their entire they did an analysis of she ran the sales function for professional services, and they looked at the 150 sales reps that they have that sold their product across the country, and the only people that made quota the prior year overachieve their professional services portion of their quota. So it just it for them and for her, it was so eye-opening that it's so self-evident that professional services actually increases your deal size, increases your odds of winning, increases your success. And, oh, by the way, the 20%, 30% of people that actually achieved quota, right? Those are the ones that PS wants to continue to help and work with, and so they get more of the attention. It becomes this symbiotic relationship, but people at the moment have the option to opt in or out of that, and too many are opting out.
And not to mention that the dirty little secret, it's better for your customers, right? Hey, what? Yeah, it's amazing. Anyway, great job, Eric. We'll have him back. Take us home, Anthony.
All right. If you enjoyed this and enjoyed Eric, check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any podcast network, and check out the back library of other guests that we've had on in the past. While you're there, like, subscribe, and do all of those things associated with those sites. Feel free to reach out to Dean or I on LinkedIn or email us at podcast@consultantsway.com if you have questions or suggestions for future guests. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.